And you bring the book up later and Peg will autograph it for you.
Yeah, great. Sure. Thank you, Karen, and hello, Democrats. I'm Peg Bowden. I live in the borderlands. I live on a ranch. I can actually see the lights of Nogales from our place. Unlike Sarah Palin, who claims she could see the lights of Russia, I really can't see the lights of another country. So I want to talk with you today about the uniqueness of living in the borderlands, which I love because I feel like I have one foot in Mexico, one foot in the United States. It's an area that's rich in the culture and heritage of our beautiful state of Oregon. People in my county, which is Santa Cruz County, speak both Spanish and English. When I go to the market, the food is different. The music is very Latino. It's culturally a very rich place to live. And my idea of a healthy border is a place where there is an exchange of customs, ideas, food, music, people, language. I'm a nurse, and I look at a healthy border as a semi-permeable membrane for all you scientists here, where things can flow back and forth. I don't look at it as a place with a huge wall, which is, it's kind of like a prophylactic or a condom, actually, where nothing passes through, and so cultures die. There's no cross-fertilization of ideas, and it is not a healthy way to live to your next door neighbor. So, I moved back to the desert in 2002 after growing up in Tucson, because the desert to me is a very sacred place. If you've lived in the desert, it gets in your bones, it gets in your soul. It's a place to be totally alone. It's a place to go on a pilgrimage. It's a place to reflect. It's a place where there's total silence. It's a place of extremes. You can freeze in the winter, and you can bake in the summer. And I like those extremes. It is a land of hard edges, which is the name of my book. So what I want to talk with you today about are my experiences living in the borderlands, because it's much different than when I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And I want to thank some of my friends who came today, because we grew up together in Tucson. In fact, we all sang in Catalina Methodist in the choir in Tucson in 1956, 7, 8. So they're some of my dearest and oldest friends. And thank you for coming. So when I moved back to the borderlands, so we bought 50 acres, we built a house, my husband and I moved back here to retire because I love the desert. But I noticed when I would drive to the grocery store, often there were lines of young men sitting along the side of this country road, and a Border Patrol agent kind of pacing back and forth in front of them. And the men usually had on dark hoodies, had a gallon jug of water beside them, and they looked, well, they didn't look like terrorists. And I would look at them, they would look at me, they would give me eye contact. I always slowed down driving by. Sometimes they would give me the peace sign. And as I drove past them. I could see them still watching me in my rearview mirror, and the faces haunted me. They haunted me for years because I didn't do anything about it, but think about them wondering, who are you? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? Where will you go from here? Because obviously you've been caught. They looked like lost boys in a strange land. They reminded me of my son. So once I stopped, well, a couple times actually, I stopped on my way to town and asked, do you need any water? And the Border Patrol agent would say, no lady, we're fine, keep going, keep going. And I would tell myself, well, Peg, mind your own business. Homeland Security knows what they're doing. So what woke me up was the shooting of Gabrielle Giffords in 2011. Because I was happily sitting on my plot of land with my husband, painting, I'm a musician. And when that happened, I decided, if you're going to live in a democracy, you've got to get more involved and you have to find out what is going on with the immigration crisis on our border. Because all I would read were, there's death and mayhem in the desert, there's decapitated heads, it's a dangerous place to live. My friends in Oregon thought I was crazy living here. So, quite by accident, I found out about the Green Valley Samaritans, which is a group out of Green Valley. I like to think of them as renegade senior citizens. I think the mean age of the group is probably 73. They all have, white hair like I do. So I Googled them, and quite by accident, I showed up at a meeting cold. I didn't know anybody. It's at a little church outside of Green Valley. And there were 120 people there at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. And they were on time. I thought, these are my kind of people. They took notes. The meeting was 1 hour. I found out that the mission of the Samaritans is to prevent deaths in the desert. I like the simplicity of this because, quite frankly, I didn't know what to do about those young men I was seeing on the side of the road being rounded up once or twice a week when I drove to town. So I decided that I would commit to being involved with the Samaritans for 1 year. I would go down to the Comedor, which is a shelter in Mexico, which is not that far from my house, and immerse myself in this situation and see what I could find out. I didn't know what I was going to do from there, but I needed to learn more about it. So that's what I did. I began going to the Comedor each Tuesday morning, and the Comedor is a very simple shelter run by Jesuits and the Sisters of the Eucharist. And these are both Mexican and American Catholic people who run the operation. And the Comedor is just a dugout hill. And it actually reminds me of the stable in Bethlehem, which I have never seen, but I've seen pictures of it. And so it's dug out of a hill, the Comedor. There's a little tin roof going over it. There's a cyclone fence. I mean, the walls are dirt. There's a little cyclone fence in front of it with a tarp that says the Kino Border Initiative, which is the name of the outfit, the Jesuits that run the place. And there's a resident cat running around making sure that the mouse population is down. It is not a slick, modern place at all, and it struck me in its simplicity, and yet between 50 to 100 migrants come twice a day for a breakfast and a dinner. And the numbers are down, thankfully, but there were 50, I think there were at least 50 there last Tuesday when we went down. So we serve breakfast, we bring clothes. I'm a nurse, so if there are wounds to tend to, I do my best to help with not a glorified first aid. We don't have an elaborate clinic by any means. But mostly, I found myself listening to the stories of the people and being very touched by their stories. The men there are often dirty, they're battered. I can smell them. They have not had a shower for a long, long time. Many have been lost in our desert. Their shoes have flopping soles. They want to talk. Often they will pull out, I will say, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" Instead of answering me, they'll pull a Ziploc plastic bag out of their back pocket, show me battered pictures of their children, their wife, who often live in Chicago, New York, Phoenix, LA. They are desperate to get back to their families. They are willing to lose their life to do this. Many of them are fleeing for their life. They're coming up from Central America. They're poor, but they feel it's too dangerous for them to stay, and they're fleeing for their life, and they're looking for safety. Many are sick from the water they've been drinking in the desert because they've been drinking out of cattle troughs. So we do our best to help them with their GI distress. So what we do, what do the Samaritans do? We serve breakfast, we hand out the clothes, we offer a listening ear, and something that I've done as a nurse is often their feet are very blistered and emaciated from miles and miles in the desert, or even miles coming up from Mexico and Central America. So I wash feet. Never in my nursing career have I washed feet. This is an overwhelmingly emotional act, which I still haven't really figured out why I am so moved by this simple act. It's painful, it's overwhelming, and in ways I don't understand, but we have these little plastic dish pans that we all have. We fill them with warm water and Epsom salts. I have a pair of tweezers, and I will have a teenager or a young man sitting. I will be on my knees and washing their feet and kind of picking away the dead skin and doing what I can to treat the blisters. Now, it's very biblical.
Yeah.
And I went to Sunday school, Catalina Methodist, and I never really got it about the washing of the feet. You've probably read about the women washing Jesus' feet when he was walking in the desert, and washing the feet with their hair. I mean, it always seemed like such a cultural disconnect for me. But there I am on my knees, white hair, with a young man. Often the young man is crying. They're usually crossing themselves multiple times, saying gracias, gracias to me. And I am humbled by this whole experience. And I think what has struck me about doing this is I'm a white woman, educated, U of A, and I am used to Mexican people waiting on me. They clean our houses, they clean our hotels, they clean our toilets, they sweep our hallways, and they quietly stand on the outside of the fancy banquets and charitable dinners that I attend with trays of fancy food, and they quietly serve me. And at the Commodore, I am serving them. And I think that, I get emotional even talking about it, that I'm really happy to do that. It just feels right. I'm serving them breakfast, I'm tending their wounds, I'm telling them the desert is dangerous. I'm asking them to be careful, cuidado, vaya con Dios, buena suerte, good luck. Because no matter how many times I tell them It is not a one-day walk to Tucson from this shelter. It is a 7-day walk if you are lucky. There is no way you can carry enough water to get from here to there. They're going to try and do it anyway, because to be separated from your children and family, logic goes out the window. You're going to figure out how to do it, and a lot of them do. I get calls from New York and Chicago, because I've given them my cell phone number, and they'll say, I'm here. And I say, how did you get there? And they say, it's a long story, but many, many people make it to their destination. So it's not all doom and gloom at the Commodore. I've kind of given you the dark side. But there's a priest there, Father Samuel, who plays a mean guitar, and he knows every barroom song in Mexico, and he will break into song. The migrants will join him. A couple will often jump up, grab me to dance, or one of the Samaritans want to dance around the shelter. Children will be running around chasing the cat. There will be squeals of delight. The people will join in song. Most of the songs I don't know, because they're kind of the dirty and down barroom songs of Mexico. And the nuns will sing right along with them. So it could be a party. And it's so incongruous to me that we can be in utter despair one moment, washing feet, the next moment we're dancing. But you know, that's Mexico. Mexico is such a dramatic, wonderful country. I love it. So what is the answer to all of this? Obama, bless him, is trying. His last executive order essentially said, we're going to protect the deportation of undocumented parents who have kids here, who are either American or U.S. citizen, or they are legal residents. We will protect those parents, and we won't separate families. That's a good first start. We will also increase our protection of the dreamers. And these are the young people who have been here since they were 3-4 months old. We met some actually on Tuesday. They've lived in Phoenix for 30 years. They had a broken tail light maybe, and they were deported. Obama's saying this must stop. These people feel more American than they do Mexico. In fact, I've met several deported dreamer kids who didn't speak Spanish. So if I had a magic wand and could whisper in Obama's ear, actually I sent him a book. Well, to be honest, I sent it to Michelle. And I wrote in the book, I said, Michelle, read a chapter at night to your husband and tell him that these stories do not need to happen, that there is a way out of this. So she wrote me a thank you note. Yeah. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would issue guest worker passes, visas, to the farmers and the low-skilled laborers who want to work here for a while and then they want to go back home. There's a lot of people a lot of people trapped in the United States because they can't go back to Mexico and then they can't get back to their families, so they're trapped here. 11 million undocumented people is the estimate are here. 75-80% are from Latin America, Mexico, Latin America. So issuing guest worker visas is not rocket science. It is an easy fix, and yes, we would have to keep track and all of that, but you know, keeping track of people is something we seem to be honing that skill more and more, much to my dismay, but it would be, I think, fairly easy to track who's here, who's going back and forth. And that's number one I would do. Number two, I would decriminalize drugs. Controversial, but as a nurse, I think drug consumption is a public health issue. It is not a criminal issue. Our jails are filled with people who have very severe, well, they've either, had a Ziploc bag of marijuana in their back pocket, and they're spending years in our jails, and it's just ridiculous. So I would develop treatment centers for addictions. Because there would probably be addiction, we have addiction issues now. But instead of throwing them in jail, I think we need to really understand at a deeper level why some people become addicted and why some people don't, and how to treat these issues. I think the war on drugs is a lie. I think it's a war for drugs. Drugs now are plentiful, cheaper, we never miss a shipment, and there's absolutely no effect on drug sales since the war on drugs began, which was 40 years ago. I mean, we are losing this war. We've been losing it for a long time. And interestingly, the drug sales are important to the Mexico economy. We're talking billions of dollars passing into Mexico because of the illicit trafficking of drugs. In fact, if we keep this war going, drugs may be free because they're getting cheaper and cheaper. I think the only people that are really benefiting from the war on drugs are the drug dealers. Number 3, I would rethink NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's been in effect since 1994. I thought it was a great idea at the time. Clinton brought it in. Sounded good to me. But migration from Latin America has increased 75% since NAFTA was initiated. It has disrupted the peasant agriculture in Mexico. The big agribusinesses that we've developed in Mexico have overwhelmed the peasant farmers who have been on their little plots of land for hundreds of years, and they can no longer sustain their farming practices, and so they are coming north. And I would say most of the people I meet at the Comedor are farmers from southern Mexico and Central America, and they've had to sell their farms, or they've abandoned their farms. Number 4, I would fast track the path to citizenship for the dreamers. These are the kids who are already here. They've gone through our schools, they've gone through our universities, they're educated, many of them, and many of them have never been to Mexico, except they were born in Mexico, and they came here when they were small children or babies. So I would just let them come out of the shadow and into the light. So why do I do this? My husband asked me this. Why do you go down there I committed to doing it for 1 year, and I'm on year 4, because the work has changed me. Most of the migrants I see have been stripped of everything. They've been stripped of their identification papers. They've been stripped of their shoelaces and their belts, which is what the Border Patrol agents take away from them when they're caught. They've been separated from their families. They are at the lowest point in their life. And yet, they are generous, they are hardworking, they want to talk with me about their stories. We share a laugh. We don't talk about stuff. We talk about our families. I look at pictures of where they're from. I hear about their life in Mexico. And I feel a reservoir of spirit about them that I find lacking often in America. They are people of faith because that's all they have. And I'm not a church-going person, but I feel like when I go to the Comedor, I'm going to church. There's a dignity about them that they're ashamed because for the first time in their life, they're asking for something. They need help, they need food. They are my heroes. So I become radicalized about all of this over these years because so many of our laws, and I mean I love America, I am an American, I'm here, I'm in it for the long haul, but often our laws don't respect human beings. When I saw those young men being picked up at the side of the road, I think of I'm German. I think of Nazi Germany. I think of the Nazis picking up the Jews, putting them in trucks, and the German people driving on to the grocery store, which is exactly what I did for many years. That's the vision that comes up for me. I think of the segregation I went through in the 1960s of black people in the schools, at the lunch counters, at the buses, and I think always people of color. I think of how we've isolated American Indians on reservations, always people of color. For the record, the wall for me is an abomination. It's an embarrassment. I'm ashamed of it. I think it has nothing to do with national security. These are not terrorists that are climbing the walls. These are not terrorists crossing our desert. The terrorists either live here or they're flying into our country and they have papers, they have a passport. The people in the desert are poor people. We've built a wall that's keeping out poor people. So that's not the America I was taught to believe in. Those are not my values. Those are not the values of the Democrats that I know. So I want to close with a quote of my brother, Charles Bowden. He is a noted writer. He died very unexpectedly 6 months ago. He's written a lot of books. Chuck is the writer. The last thing I ever thought I would do is write a book, but I was obsessed. I have become obsessed with this issue because I see it every day. But here's a quote from Chuck. This was an NPR quote. Now, my brother and I, we grew up with Bob Dylan. So we really like Bob Dylan, like the old Bob Dylan. I don't know about the new one. Or the new old one, I guess. But Bob Dylan wrote a song called Knocking on Heaven's Door.
Yeah.
Yes. And here was Chuck's quote. There's a knock at the door, and it is not heaven's door. And I open it, and there's a face, a hungry face, a frightened face. And I say, come in.
We do have time for questions. One thing I know in your book, you wrote one little chapter about watching the immigration courts, where the people that are deported supposedly have a day in court to explain why they shouldn't be sent back. And maybe you could just talk about what that happens in reality on these immigration courts.
Right. Yeah, there is an Operation Streamline, which takes place Monday through Friday in Tucson, and actually other spots in Arizona, where 70 migrants they're kind of cherry-picked out of the desert. They're undocumented people, so they have their day in court. They have an attorney. I've gone to several of these court hearings, and what is unnerving to me is all 70 are shackled with their hands shackled and their feet. So if you've ever seen those old prints of the slaves in the early 1800s and all that were being sold, this is what it looks like. The men shuffle in, and women. They have a few moments before the judge, and on 99.9% will say, yes, I'm guilty, coupable, I am guilty of crossing into your country illegally. And then the judge sentences them to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. If they cross several times, they get a longer sentence in a detention center. What I remember about being in the courtroom as you walk in, it has that sort of stale, air-conditioned feel about it. It's a big room. And on one side are 70 brown faces, and on the other side are the lawyers and all that are 90% Anglo white faces. And then I sit in kind of the gallery. You are not allowed to make contact or wave or do anything with the migrants, because I'm often looking to see if I recognize anybody from the Commodore. And sometimes when I would walk in, they would kind of look at the group of white people coming in, and I would recognize some, and you'd get a little smile from them, and I kind of sneak in the peace sign. But it's illegal to communicate at all with the migrants. It's a kangaroo court, as far as I'm concerned. Occasionally, one of the migrants will say, "I'm not guilty. I am seeking asylum in your country because I cannot survive in Honduras or wherever, and my family is here, and I am not guilty. All I want to do is work." And we all secretly applaud. But if you say you're not guilty, then you go back to the detention center for often months while you wait for your asylum hearing. So the migrants have learned if you just say you're guilty, you're going to get out of here sooner, and you're going to be back in your home country, but at least you won't be in jail. So questions? Anybody have any questions or, yes?
Do you see any children?
Yes, yeah, thank you for that question. Do we see any children? Not a lot. When we were there on Tuesday, there was a 14-month-old baby, and the mom and dad, and they were on their way to Louisiana. So they were walking to Louisiana. So we had a map of the United States, and we spread it out on the table there, and we showed them how far it was. I'm not sure it will dissuade them, but this was a family. Where were they from? Honduras. They were from Honduras. They were fleeing for their life. Honduras is probably, I think it's considered one of the most dangerous countries now in the world, certainly in this hemisphere. And they would like to seek asylum, but they have a mission. They are on their way to Louisiana. Baton Rouge, no, it's in Mexico. No, that's not Louisiana. Yeah. Yes.
I'd just like to add to something you said. I think that might change the way we look at it. Is Republicans are famous for changing estate taxes to death taxes and changing the names of things in order to change the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I would really encourage people to talk of these people not as migrants or as immigrants or undocumented or aliens, mm-hmm. but talk about them for what they really are, refugees.
You're right, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I agree. In my book, I also use the word pilgrims, but refugees, you're absolutely right. They're war refugees. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned NAFTA.
Yes.
You know, partly the reason is not really NAFTA. The reason is China. The problem is just about the time NAFTA came into effect, China finally took off. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is instead of the maquiladoras, which are supposed to take up the employment and other things in Mexico across the border, China took it all away. Yeah. So basically Chinese goods flooded the market, especially the US and other places, at a cost that was impossible. Even with maquiladora costs and labor costs in Mexico, it's still 3 or 4 times what it was in China. And so you can do the same thing in China. You have the migrant labor in China that is not allowed to settle down in any of the cities, and they have to go through exactly the same problems that these migrants are going through coming to the US. So, you know, I think in a sense we are almost in cahoots with China, trying to do the same thing and encouraging them to do what they are doing with their own internal migrants, who are just as poor, maybe even poorer. Yeah. And all the exploitation of those people are being done by our great companies. I mean, where you take Apple or any company, any of the companies to which we all sort of willingly subscribe and get our telephones and everything from, they are basically manufacturing it in China at a cost that's, you know, 1/10 of what it should be really. And if they could have done the same thing in Mexico, which is what would have been the ideal thing with the NAFTA, then you wouldn't have had half of this problem. But you know, this is the way life moves on. 20 years later, you have sort of all these great insights, but basically nobody thought of it. Everybody thinking about China, exploding, but why did they explode? Only because of the Walmarts and the Apples and
Right.
others who went there.
Right, I think, yeah, and you brought up a good point, is how interconnected and global and complex all of these things are. You make a change in one small area, it affects the whole world. I think another thing that I learned about NAFTA, and I learned it from the farmers, is they said, even if your country gave me back my land back in Chiapas, I wouldn't want it anymore because you poured all your pesticides and herbicides and everything on my ground. And I used to raise a type of corn, a blue corn or whatever. There are like 100 different kinds of corn in Mexico. But with Monsanto and DuPont and the GMO crops that you're growing down there, I can't grow my pure corn anymore. So my ground is ruined, and here I am. And I'm not a factory worker. You've got maquiladoras here, which is the factories on the border. You're paying a slave wage. I don't know what to do. I want to be a farmer. So I'm on my way to Oregon to pick pears and peaches because I know that life. I know that life. So, yes.
I apologize. I'm just here visiting from California, and I haven't read your book. However, one part that I don't hear in the debate, because this issue isn't just an issue in the United States, is the issue of population control. We used to hear about that, many of us gray hairs in the 70s, and I don't hear that anymore. And there just aren't too many people.
The birth rate of Mexico actually is dropping dramatically, and it's about the same as the birth rate in the U.S. right now. Yes, yeah. 2.8 children per, I don't know what. But the birth rate is dropping, but population is an issue, climate change is an issue. You're absolutely right. I'm a humanitarian, I don't have a good answer for that question.
I don't think anybody does it.
I'm eager to read your book. I'm familiar with your brother's work and,
Yes.
and always very impressed with it. This issue of 11 million, which we have been hearing about for years, it seems as it's just in a log jam. Where would you start, in pragmatic terms, if you could get the dialogue really revved up and some very practical things to do with the situation now, instead of some of these highfalutin bills which doesn't look like will go anywhere? Where would you begin to resolve this issue of our refugees?
The 11 million in this country?
Yeah, how would we begin to get this thing?
I would legalize the presence of the dreamers, for starters, these are the young people that are undocumented, but they've been here since they were children. That's several million right there. I guess I would start there. And then I would also issue work visas, so a lot of the undocumented people here could go back to Mexico, visit their families who they haven't seen in 20 years, and then come back home here. I would do those two things.
Could you foresee anything in terms of the citizenship issue? Because there are many, as you say, that really don't want to remain permanent residents here, and they do want to reunite with their families and take the money back with them, obviously.
Yes.
So how do you counter people's disagreement with citizenship and so forth when they themselves don't all want to embrace that?
I would say most of the people I meet at the Comodoro do not want to be citizens of our country. They love their country. They love their villages. They love their mother's cooking back in some village. They don't want citizenship. They just don't want to be chased and harassed and treated as a criminal when they're here. They want to be able to go back and forth. So the other thing is, I think one of the biggest sources of income for Mexico right now are the drugs. The second biggest source of income are the billions of dollars that undocumented are making in our country under the table and sending home to their villages in Mexico. So there's a lot of money going back and forth between those 11 million people that are here. They're sending it back to their countries.
And about 0.5% of that 7 billion stays on here in terms of money or the fees and everything else transacted.
You're right, exactly. Yeah, and you know, I'm not good at figures anymore. My brain is a sieve about figures. But just the amount of money per day in Arizona spent by people in Mexico is in the millions per day. It's huge. It's huge. And if people were able to come here more freely, it would be even larger. I mean, people like to shop Walmart from Mexico. They love to come here and shop for our goods, because actually our goods here are cheaper than they are in Mexico. Yeah. It's kind of a myth that, well, you go to Mexico, you can get cheap stuff. Not true. Milk, food is a better bargain here in the U.S. than in Mexico. One more myth I want to say. People say, aren't you afraid? You know, white-haired grandmother going down to Mexico every week. You know, Mexico is a violent country. The United States is a violent country. I mean, when I go in a Safeway parking lot now, I look around, I remember Gabby Givers. When I'm in a movie theater, I look for the exit. When I'm in a school, in the hallway, and I visit our local high school frequently, I keep my head up, because I don't have to tell you what happens in our country with guns and with crazy people. So when I'm in Mexico, I do the same thing. I do not wander around at night in Mexico, in Nogales. But I feel very comfortable crossing that line every day. I hate the militarization of our border. I've taken people from Germany down there, and they say, "Oh my God, it's just like East Germany." You know, with the rifles and the guys looking at you. I took my friend down last Tuesday, and we were going to take pictures there by the wall. I said, "Don't do it, because one of the Homeland Security will come running out and will delete the pictures on your camera, because this is considered a secure area." So it's the militarization of the border. It's not like the old days when we used to go down to Nogales, and Chuck and I, my brother, we used to slip under this one barbed wire that was the border, because we didn't want to wait in line with our parents. We just slipped through, and customs agents would wave at us, and it was, you know, you did not need a passport, ID, nothing. And I'm not in favor of an open border. I think there needs to be a process, but it's not. This is an easy fix, and for some reason our Congress is so frightened of making it so complicated, and it really doesn't need to be. And hundreds, thousands of people are dying because of it. So, thank you so much.